The other thing he's told me when I've run it a couple different times, he's like, just don't quit. If you decide to leave, that's different. Don't quit because you're quitting on yourself. And there's moments where, and I even not too long ago, I had to hold up the mirror and say, is it time? Is it time to stop? Did I hit that wall? Did I hit that threshold that now it's, and when I do that and you kind of deep, review and think about it, for me, it was like, no, it's not time. We are so close to this, or we're so close. And so, I think that his words kind of play in my mind, which is, that level of, don't quit on yourself. If you want to grow in your role, this is where you grow, right? In my team, all the way cascading down. And you're right, it makes people uncomfortable. There's this curve that kind of talks about your AI adoption that I read about in the AI leadership book. And that's exactly it. You have this like light bulb moment where you're like, oh my God, this is what it's capable of. And then you drop down because it's like, oh, this is a lot to learn. But you just got to push through and what you get on the other side. So that's what I've been really focused on with my leaders and my teams, even down to Sherpas. This is how it's going to adopt or die, right? So adopt it, learn it, or you're going to die, because this is where we're headed.
Welcome to the Brainwaves podcast by Opus, where we sit down with industry leaders to unpack their journey, explore key challenges, and talk about how they are shaping the future of behavioral health and healthcare technology. My name is Humberto Buniotto. I am the CEO of Opus, and today we'll be talking about patient experience, particularly during intake for behavioral health organizations. We'll start with the bona fides. Our guest today is Jessica Walker, the founder and CEO of Care Sherpa, a concierge-style service helping healthcare providers turn patient inquiries into actual care. Before founding Care Sherpa, she spent over 2 decades in healthcare marketing and patient engagement, with leadership roles at Gallup, Ganey, Influence Health, and Clariture. And there she helped providers across the country improve access and patient experience. Today, her team supports clinicians and organizations in 38 states, reducing no-shows and boosting conversion by combining tech with real human connection. Jessica is on a mission to fix the last mile of healthcare and make sure no patient inquiry goes unanswered. Jessica, I'm excited to have you here. I hope I got your intro right. Why don't you give us your intro to make sure I didn't miss anything?
I think you did actually quite well. I don't know what else to put in there. So, probably the only thing I would add is, as you mentioned, over 20 years expertise in patient engagement, patient acquisition, and then back that up with like the research around consumer behavior. So I like to think about like how consumers buy or how consumers behave when they're in a healthcare experience. And then one other fast fact that I don't think was covered in there, but also you're going to hear me talk a lot about today, like that service heart and that kind of mindset of how do you extend that care and compassion that builds trust and builds confidence. And I say that comes from my background in hospitality. I used to manage hotels, was actually the youngest general manager in the history of Hilton hotels at 20 years old.
Wow.
So that's, everything we talk about today, that's a lens that colors it through.
Nice. Awesome. I'd love to hear that. Take us back to the moment where you kind of decided to leave your corporate career and start Care Sherpa. I read a little bit about a friend whose call for surgery went unanswered by a hospital, and that seems like a real turning point.
Mm-hmm.
What was what was going through your mind, and when you realized, like, I've got to fix this problem?
Yeah, it actually a couple of things. One is exactly that story, and I'll share that in a little bit. But prior to that, this 20 years experience in patient engagement acquisition, I was working with large health systems and group providers and practices. And the strategy was looking at technology to solve our patient acquisition. So think about everything from digital marketing and how do we do that smartly and data driven, down to like smart websites and all that. But what I found is that we'd spend time and time again and hundreds of thousands of dollars building these fantastic campaigns to make the phone ring. And then that last mile, like when they actually called and said, hey, I'm interested, no one would answer the phone, right? So I went out into the market to try to find a solution that could help my clients with this problem. All I found were like call centers that didn't really hit the mark, or maybe like chat bots and things like that just didn't really, again, that emotional journey. So I was already had that in the back of my mind. And then a friend of mine was seeking bariatric weight loss surgery. So this is not a cheap surgery. This is, $20,000, $30,000. She lives in the Chicago market, and she saw a billboard on I-90, very expensive real estate to have, a billboard for a provider that was offering the services. So that's who she called. And literally, they never called her back. She called 2 times and never got a return call. And she knew the work that I was doing. And she said, why in the hell would they spend all that money on a billboard not to call me back? Right. And that mindset, and then couple that, I personally went through an elective medical journey and had a fantastic surgical clinical experience, but everything before and everything after from a customer service perspective was terrible. Where I don't recommend this surgeon to this day, even though he did wonderful clinical work, but the experience was terrible. So all those kind of coupled together were my spark moment to say, okay, no one is fixing this issue. I can't find another solution that will address it. I guess I'm the one to do it.
Mm. So the typical startup story of I don't see anybody fixing
Right.
this. Or initially you think there must be somebody fixing this, and that's
Somebody's
what
doing
you
it. Yeah.
did,
No.
and then you're like, I guess I got to go into business and fix this thing, right?
Yeah, and actually, I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, which is one of the meccas for healthcare and healthcare technology. And I literally spent a year going around Nashville trying to convince other partners I know and tech companies. I'm like, oh, here's a market opportunity. No one's addressing it. And people kept asking me, well, if you believe in this, why are you not doing it? And it was that realization of like, well, I've never started my own business, so I don't know what I'm doing. And then that journey of like confidence to say, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know this is a problem and I have unique experience and I'll figure it out. And here we are 6 years later, still strong.
Um, I talked to a pretty large operator in the substance use space last week, and they're actually in 6 states, multiple locations, and the CFO said we are missing 30% of our inbound calls. And I was
Hmm.
just dumbfounded
Hmm.
that because I know their scale, I know how much they're spending on marketing and
Hmm.
to, like you said, make the phone ring, and I just could not believe. And they're pretty sophisticated. Like they've got systems in place, they got CRM, they got staff, they got a call center, and I was just like, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
Um, how does that happen? How do
Yeah.
patients slip through the cracks? Is it just like a lack of people to answer the phone? What
Great
happens?
question. Well, our research shows it's actually gotten worse since the time I started Care Sherpa. So the fact that the last research study that we did, 81% of prospective patients who inquire about care or services across healthcare, 81% never move forward. And when
Wow.
you sit with that stat, you're like, how in the world are we in business? But when you really look at, they might move forward, but then to actually get to admission, to actually get to treatment, you look at the whole pipeline, that's where the leakage. I call it the silent killer of healthcare revenue, is that he can give you 30% missed calls, but he also can't tell you of the people who did call and did talk to an intake agent, how many of those actually move forward, and if not, where and why, right? So similar issue, we had a behavioral health substance use disorder group call us last fall, and similar, they said, we only know we have 5,000 calls a month, but we really don't know what these calls are for and how many leads and what this looks like. And that's one of the fundamental problems is we've got all these disparate systems. You and I were talking before turning on the recording about how many different like CRMs, EMRs, marketing, and the fact is like not just integrating them, and integration is one thing, but when it comes to like the people who are handling the calls, how are we, the behavior, the people, the process, the technology, all that leads to a pipeline that is fundamentally broken, but people aren't aware it's broken because it's buried and you can't see it directly. And I'd say that that's a lot of the work we do is help people dive in. And back to your example of the 30%, they're actually doing pretty good, by the way. But the majority of the reasons when we dig in and we audit, we look at forensic accounting, we find that one of the fundamental, we'll call it sins, that a lot of people do is that they're not separating out the new patient journey and making sure that that's sacred and held to a standard of making sure that every call is answered to the best of our ability. Meaning that we get calls about transportation, we get calls about, medical records, we get calls, and then your agents turn into a call center, phone tree, et cetera, when there's just way more efficient ways to do that, but also make sure those sales opportunities get handled in a completely different environment.
Mm. that tracks with what we are seeing when customers come to us and say, "Hey, we're looking for a CRM solution. Let me see Opus CRM," and they're coming from Salesforce or some other CRM. 9 times out of 10, they're just wanting to replace the tech stack. They're not really worried about what
Yep.
happens when people are put through the funnel.
Yep.
Um, so it's interesting that your approach is it doesn't matter what the stack is. Of course, that's important, but if you don't have the processes in place to actually handle the calls and
Mhm.
making sure that people are um, that calls are answered, that people that are, these patients are put through a protocol, and you actually get them care. It doesn't matter what you're using. You could be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on tech stack, and it doesn't
Yep.
matter, right?
Doesn't matter.
So
Exactly.
how do you normally, like, let's say I'm from Acme Behavioral, I call you and say, "Hey, Jessica, I'm missing at 30% of my calls. Help me." What is your process?
Yeah. Well, and you start with a good place too, which is the tech stack is relative, but that's not the most important thing. So we start up front and we'll do an assessment and an audit. Everything from when I first get introduced to a new partner, one of the first things we do, and I absolutely love, is a consumer mystery shop experience. So I will have my Sherpas go through and we'll mystery shop the provider different times a day, different days of the week, any call to action they have out there. If they have a web form, if they have a chat bot, anything that's there, we'll go in pretending as the ideal patient, right? I'm commercially insured, I have a need, and I have motivation. And then we just see what happens. So that's my first canary in the coal mine around where your gaps are and your leakage points are, right? So typically when I then open the curtain and show them, hey, here's the gaps we saw in experience, lots of heads are nodding. Sometimes we have some shock and awe in that conversation, right? Where we show no one called me back. Then the next element is starting to look at, let's talk about structure. So again, what's your current people and process? So, how many call handlers, what times a day, what's their training expertise, what expectations do you have for them to do with the calls, how many touch points, just really kind of like a diagnostic, right? Just as you would if a patient came to you with a clinical need. Like, let's diagnose, let's understand. We've got, so we have a methodology that we'll follow. And then from there, we're also then looking at the technology. So what's integrated, what's not, what are you expecting it to use? More often than not, especially in the substance use disorder area, what I have found is that you've got, let's use the example of that first touch point, that first impression. You've got people who have a heart for the substance use areas. They have a lot of mission. So I call it like really nice people doing the best they can with the tools they have, right? But that means that you've got a call handler who's on a call for 30, 40 minutes, sometimes over an hour, with a lead that's not qualified, or with a lead that we need to get other steps in the process, or we didn't cover everything in the first call, so now we're arranging transportation, now we're talking about insurance. So there's these inefficiencies in the process. So with a new partner, that's where we'll start and say, okay, let's just take this one baby step at a time and address these things. And that's where we are going to address the missed call areas, because more often than not, if we fix some of the process gaps, that'll quiet the phones in ways that are not productive calls.
Got it. In substance use specifically, it's a unique challenge, I think, at least from my perspective, having been in the industry almost 12 years now, because unlike, um, calling for, say, I don't know, plastic surgery or some
Uh,
other elective procedure,
yeah,
if the phone rings, I mean, that person could be on the side of the road withdrawing or having, some major
that one shot.
health issues.
Yep,
So you don't really have a choice to even call them back sometimes, even if you call them back within a minute,
you got
right?
it. Yep.
What are some unique challenges in substance use behavioral health that, you're seeing as I know you're kind of um, going into that, really focusing a lot on that part of healthcare now. So what are some things that some insights and things that you've come across?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head that unlike other service lines, this area, and I'll use the example of some of the data challenges. You may have a hospital or a referring partner, right, that gets you, like they have the person there in active detox and they're on the phone, and then that person themselves, the actual patient, doesn't have a phone or doesn't have minutes on their phone or whatever. And so when you think about that from a data perspective, how do you track that lead? you don't have a unique phone number to track them, right? And you may not always have all their information. And so it poses some challenges around the data collection. And then again, to your point, really requires you to have tight systems and processes that make sure that we capture every opportunity and lead and quantify it, let alone being able to go back to that referring hospital or that referring detox center and say, hey, you brought us 50 leads this month. Thanks so much. Here's what happened to them. So fundamentally, just the nature of the patients we serve poses those challenges. So many times with providers, some of the first conversations we're having are related to the fundamentals of some of the phone systems that they're using, right? Are you using a modern CCAS or other telephony platform that allows you to use AI solutions that help you quantify leads, right, and help you identify them? So that's one factor. And then secondary to that, do you have other relationships? Let's use that referring hospital. Yeah, if your call handlers are tied up with calls, what rollover strategies do you have? Like, I just want somebody to catch that call, right? And even if they're not fully trained substance use disorder intake counselor, I want them to catch the call and keep that person on the line and move it forward to a certain point till I can get an agent available. And there's just these little subtle things that make all the difference in how we effectively manage our pipeline.
Interesting. This is a good segue for I wanted to ask you about like the balance between tech and human,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously, and I'm sure you get asked about this all the time. I think I've asked you before too. AI is top of mind. Everybody's using it. I'm using it, you're using it, and we're using it in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But more and more, I feel like AI is blending into our daily lives in ways of like conversation and actually taking, in some ways, the human role, either enhancing it or replacing it. So, you guys combine technology with human outreach, which seems like the theme of your uh, uh, what you guys do. How do you leverage the technology behind the scenes to make the process efficient without actually losing that human empathy? For example,
Yeah.
the role of a CRM, or like if you had data analytics or even AI,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, making calls, taking calls, things that you and I have talked about before. How do your Sherpas use those tools to personalize the experience while not letting it be a fully automated process that doesn't take into account
Yeah.
that empathy?
Yeah, I actually was speaking with another substance use disorder group in the Midwest, and we were talking about this because they were exploring, do they put an AI agent at the front to catch that call like I was just talking about? Like, oh, is that still better than nothing? And so we're actually running some tests with them. I have some hypothesis around that. But for me, there is a level. I think this community, especially, I feel very strongly, like we talked about, like someone's on the side of the road. I don't want to risk the AI, not capturing and building that connection. We have seen, go back to the consumer behavior part, this service area especially is most dependent on confidence, trust, and building that ability, that faith, right? This person feels non-judged, that they feel embraced, they feel like, but also sometimes we also have to kick them a little bit in the butt and move them forward, right? When they're hesitant to move forward with the admission. And in my experience, that's such a uniquely human conversation that you have to especially hire and find the right talent set that does that. So I'm some biases that way, but that's where we use different selection tools to make sure we find the right person. However, there is a role for AI to assist that person. So as an example, we're using modern tools that allow for an AI agent to live listen while the agent is on and offer suggestions, right?
Yeah.
Or it'll hear an objection, it'll pose an example, or even a simple question of like the patient asks, can I bring my cell phone for the admission? And it pops open the recommended answer, right? Or they ask, oh, I have got XYZ insurance, is that covered? Again, pops up the answer. To me, that's the way that I believe is some of the best leveraging of AI, let alone the thing I referenced a moment ago around listening to the call and codifying it so we know the number of times people ask about, bringing cigarettes versus their cell phone versus visiting hours. And that way, that also influences the content that we put out on our website and other factors. So long tail though, I do think that there's going to be some additional areas that will help are very compassionate, nice people be more efficient by giving them those tools, but then still keeping the human angle to it so that, the patient feels that connection to the organization.
Got it. I say this all the time. I think there's this kind of idea of human versus AI. Um,
Uh-huh.
Everything is AI is anti human, like it's taken over, it's going to do this, I'm going to
Uh-huh.
not have a job. And, maybe in the long term future, there will be more disruption to, especially like automated things, things that are kind of,
Yep.
repetitive.
Yeah.
But generally, I see AI as more like a human plus AI kind
Hmm.
of thing where,
Superpower. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You just
Yep.
enhance what you already do. You're more
Yeah.
efficient. You can
Yep.
get more done in less time, which
Yep.
is also important.
Yep.
Um, but it is interesting to see it kind of develop because it's so nascent that
Mm.
people are kind of scared of it. And there
Yep.
are some positive applications that I think are worth investing in.
Yeah. And I think that going back to the human superpower, right? So we think about substance use disorder. We have a level of qualifications we have to take folks through from a clinical qualification, financial qualification, and like motivation index, right? So we have to understand, do they fit that criteria? Therefore, they're a good opportunity for us. And so many of the call handlers that I'm familiar with, if they have a good structure to qualify the patient, they're taking manual notes, right? Trying to capture and codify and maybe even score or qualify the patient. That's a great example of where AI comes in, that I can keep the conversation flowing like you and I are doing right now, and have that note taker in the background, capturing everything for me. So at the end of the call, I'm just editing it and saying, yep, that's check, 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 right? Way more efficient than me trying to actively listen and type at the same time.
Experienced a dramatic change in kind of how people see specifically this technology of kind of transcribing and taking notes for you in the background. With our Copilot, which is built into our EHR, you hit a button, clinician can start talking, patient at the end, it just produces a note. In the beginning, a year and a half ago when we launched it, there was a lot of, oh, I don't know, it's not going to write as well as I do, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
intrusive.
Yeah.
And when I have conversations with the leadership of our customers now, they're basically saying we can't live without it. There's just no way that we could go back, and they're using it for recruiting because
Yes.
they can put an ad up saying, "Hey, if
Yep.
you work for
Yep.
us, you don't have to write notes," which is
Oh my
like
gosh. Yes. Hmm.
we call it the broccoli of healthcare. Like it's good for you, but you nobody wants to do it.
Well, it's a change, right? Like change is scary, and there's ways to, elevate that. So for me, that is any technology adoption, right? You could joke about like when the cars were introduced and they were going to be the downfall, right? The printing press was the downfall, and that's the next evolution of AI in healthcare. But very much, I don't know your experience, but like mine too, that the more that it has taken that role of that manual duty for me, like note taking others, it frees me up to be more creative and more responsive in other ways. And I think that that's the next generation for providers in the space too.
100%. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your approach with getting buy-in from a healthcare organization to do
Mm.
things differently, right? So
Mhm.
to respond faster, treat patients like valued customers. I have a very customer-centric approach. So have you encountered any resistance in getting organizations to adopt a more consumer-minded approach? And how do you
Yeah.
convince like an organization CEO or a skeptical that they need your services or services like yours?
Yeah. Well, that whole adage of you can't make a horse, lead them to water, but you can't make them drink, right?
Mhm.
So, in my experience, what I have found is that um, I providers that come to me are those that are ready. I call it the difference between an internal bleed versus an external bleed. So, as an example, I talked about that 81% leakage in the funnel. The providers that are ready for this consumer focused, like they're bleeding externally. They are going to the emergency room, like stop the bleed. They know they're bleeding, right? And so therefore they're willing to explore this innovative new approach. They're willing to think about the patient journey differently in a way that elevates it. And then also when you back it up with data. And then you have the providers that I can talk to them, tell them blue in the face. I can show them all the data, but if they're bleeding internally and they don't see the symptoms, I can't get them to pay attention. So for me, what's worked for Care Sherpa and some of my partners is really going after identifying those where there's competitive threats. They've just maybe had a lot of turnover, their call handlers. They recognize the board is asking for, hey, where's your KPIs? Where's your performance measures? And they can't deliver them. Like those are the ones that you know, like well, let's say substance use disorder. You know you have a problem and now you're ready for a solution.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What are some of the proudest moments? I mean, you've hit, I think, 5 years having founded
Mm-hmm.
Care Sherpa now, which is a huge milestone, obviously. When you look back, what accomplishes are you most proud of? Is there a particular like patient success story or a piece of feedback from a provider or an
Yeah.
organization that made you think, yes, like this is the right thing?
Definitely. And you have those learning moments, right? You're either learning or you're winning. For me, probably when you said that, the first thing that popped into my mind was one of the early on patient stories. So when we work with a client partner, the Care Sherpa name is never shown to the patient, right? We're behind the curtains. We're just helping the person's brand, etc. But the first online patient review that we had that specifically called out their Sherpa and specifically referenced how important that person was for them on their journey. It was that moment of like, here is my vision come to life, right? That this patient had such an impactful relationship with their Sherpa that even after their treatment, they made a point to go online and like scream from the mountaintops, right? Like their Sherpa was so important to them. And it just, to me, that was a moment of like, here's why we're doing this, right? Because it does make a difference. Um, the other one that kind of comes to mind, because that's the warm fuzzy part, right? But anyone that knows me knows that yes, I've got the warm fuzzies in service, but I'm also a data geek and a data girl. So the second story is a data one. And that's where I'd been working with a client for about a year and a half and showing them all the leakage points in their pipeline. And one of them, this was for another service line, but we discovered that patients were falling out at a certain point where they had to get a psych eval before moving forward in the procedure and the treatment, right? And they had just kind of figured, like, oh, we kind of know this is a problem, but everything's okay. Once we were able to quantify that it not only took 8 weeks for people to get the psych eval, but then they were losing about 67% of patients at this stage, then they never came back. And then I tied that to the dollar amount, right? That was lost revenue. That immediately went to the board. That immediately then they brought me into an executive and board meeting to share my findings. And within 2 weeks, they got budget approval to bring on this provider and thus fix this leakage problem. And that felt very validating. Like, again, we shine light on the data, and this is the difference it makes.
Mm. And I guess on the flip side, what was some key lessons and failures along the way that taught you something important? I guess that you're probably going to have a list of those, not just two, right?
Yeah, well, the one that stands out the most, and I'm going to preface this by saying that this is a surgeon, and he and I are still great partners to this day. I still help him on other part, but he was the first breakup. I don't call it like we came to each other and we're like, hey, this partnership just isn't working, and here's why. We had issues here and there, and we both felt like it's just better if we break up, right? It's not you, it's me, kind of thing. And we joke about it now, but it's one that we recognized some of the challenges he had with his practice that he wasn't going to be able to solve. I recognized some of the ways that we weren't able to deliver and solve those problems for him. And so rather than us both be frustrated to walk away, and you get this as a CEO and a founder, like I could have held him to the contract and gotten the contract out, right? But that's not the right thing to do. It's like, nope, I'd rather have you be. And again, he's given us referrals, after this time, but it still is a gut punch when you have that first like breakup. And that was one that I always call it like a post-mortem. When we have something happen internally with my team, it's not a he said, she said, finger pointing. It's kind of what we do in healthcare, right? Which is a nameless, blameless, like what did we learn?
Blameless retroactive. Yeah, we do the same
Yep.
thing.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, what did we learn? What processes can we put into place? How do, and sometimes I call it holding up the mirror. Before we point fingers internally, externally, let's hold up the mirror and say, what did we do? Where did we, where could we have done better? What did we learn through this process? And so where psychologically, talk about behavioral health, like it hits you in a way that as a founder, you feel like, oh, I failed. I suck and all this negative spiral. But I can look back at that and say it changed my business fundamentally after that first big lesson.
Nice. Awesome. I want to go back to we talked about kind of when somebody's, Acme Behavioral comes to you and says, I need help.
Hmm. Yeah.
Once you do the assessment and you kind of say, okay, I think we can plug in here, how do you operate in the day to day? Like you mentioned earlier that patients don't really know that they're talking to Care Sherpa. So how does that
Hmm.
actually work? Like you
Yeah.
plug into their CRM, like what's
Hmm.
the inner workings of that?
Well, Care Sherpa really has three fundamental offerings, and I'll say this because it kind of goes sequential. So, we have that you need me to come in and take over your intake team and really work your funnel, like the turnkey business development, from first impression to admission and beyond. That's probably the core of our business, right? And a lot of what we do, depending upon the partner. But then you have a middle where they maybe have call handlers and they'd like us to help train them or us to help track their performance, in addition to using our technology to monitor their pipeline. So, then that's another kind of way that we serve, where they're not using my Sherpas, but we're working with their staff and their team. And then that third is, we'll call it like optimization consulting around, hey, we've monitored the pipeline, we look at your people process technology and help you address the gaps that are causing you to have revenue leakage, right? So typically, depending upon how the partner comes to me, determines the pathway. But let's assume they're saying, "Hey, Jessica, we need to outsource this. We're interested in your Sherpa services." So what we actually do, as I mentioned, the assessment. That's our starting point. I have to know, people, process, technology, et cetera. And then from there, using our methodology of best practices and where we know from, SOPs to documentation to whatever the case may be. So we spend about 45 days really mapping out the patient journey, looking at leakage points, looking at consumer opportunities or consumer experience issues. And then that's where we plug in to either address those or help the client to address those. So it could be as simple as, like, one of the last behavioral health groups did not have a good solution for running their VOBs right before confirming the admit. Great, we can plug that hole for you. And then from there, we really become an outsourced extension of the team, right? So the Sherpas assigned to this client, they are an air quote employee of that partner. They know how to talk about them, they know how to sell them, but it's just like that, but having someone work remotely. And then the difference is that we just, somebody called it where I alleviate their headache of staffing, right? Because we handle all of it. You've got call handlers that are educated, informed, and certified on how to talk about your group and your practice, and then we hold them accountable. We use all the quality tools. We do all the coaching, all the development, all the sales training, and then you get the end result of the data and the reporting of how your pipeline's growing.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And do you work with, say, admissions team on a hybrid basis? Say they're taking part of the calls, you're taking part of the calls, or do you take that on 100%? And I guess as a follow up to that, are you generally engaging with say, an organization, behavioral health, or any?
Hmm.
Are you engaging them on a limited basis, or like a short-term basis, or are
Sure.
they looking for you to kind of stay on and kind of pioneer that process?
Great questions. I guess my answer, right, is it depends. It depends on where the organization is and where their needs are. So if they're not sure if they want to keep it in-house or if they're ready for us to do the turnkey solution, we will do that hybrid where I'll say great, or I'll become like an overflow team for them. Like
Mm,
we've done that a couple of times, or covered maybe hours that they can't get coverage themselves as an overflow team. That's done. I like that kind of head to head where they have their call handlers, we use our call handlers, and we'll see kind of the outcomes and the performance differences, and
mhm.
that usually again makes the business case. And then outside of that, I have a couple of providers where, as they've grown, we've just decided, like, is it right for you to bring it in house? And so then now we've shifted to where I'm doing their quality monitoring, I'm doing their performance evaluations, coaching, et cetera. So it's still a way to kind of help the pipeline run. But my long-term clients, we might start with a micro pilot of, hey, can you just handle referrals? Like we just need someone to be very responsive to referrals. We start there. And then as they have turnover, maybe we add in, more, or as they expand to new locations, then we add in more. So my short answer on all that is it really depends on the strategy and where their needs are. And I'll kind of pivot and adapt and just see where I can help them.
Very nice. Um, let's you talk a little bit about kind of the future. What's the road ahead for you, say 5 years from now? What do you see Care Sherpa and the patient
Yeah.
engagement landscape? Any new service lines or technologies on the horizon? What are you working on?
Yeah, so we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in the conversation. So for me, 6 years doing this, we're just coming up on our 6 year anniversary. And so I have over 400,000 recorded patient interactions across a variety of service lines. And so for me, this is probably the most excited I've been from a data geek perspective, because we're using that to feed into and start to build some more modeling around how can you build a predictive score, right? What are the things that if I hear this during a call, XYZ, the score lights up at the likelihood to convert. So we're, really using some of our data to refine that. And then the next element is kind of alluded to it earlier, where I've been using tools in-house from my Sherpas, such as that agent assist or that knowledge bank tool from an AI perspective, or that, live monitoring that so that every call gets quality scored even live while it's happening. So where I see Care Sherpa going is really offering more of a hybrid approach to say, hey, if you would like a turnkey, we got you, right? If you'd like a hybrid where we can give you our best practice tools, resources, et cetera, we can turn that on for you as more of a software or a SaaS approach, and then give you the insights that you need. And then really the thing that I get super duper excited about is, over this time, we've been benchmarking the pipelines, right? So looking at if you're a substance use disorder, how long should it take from first call to admission? And what are those gaps and areas? If you're looking for bariatric surgery, et cetera, so forth. So I see Care Sherpa moving into more of that quantifiable pipeline, measurement, optimization partner.
Very interesting. Um, what, from like an innovator's perspective, as someone who took a personal passion and turned it into a company, right? Turned it into a solution. What advice would you give to other healthcare professionals, entrepreneur, or anyone who's kind of seen a problem, wants to fix it? Any
Yeah.
sort of insight into balance, like a mission-driven aspect and the business side? Um, if I guess uh, having now scaled Care Sherpa over the last almost 6 years, what advice would you give to somebody who maybe is confronted with a problem like you did and kind of turn it into a solution?
Oh man, there's so much. Um,
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, there's like the jokey comment, but then also the real one. So I think for me, I was just talking to somebody else who was on that, I call it on the cliff, right? You recognize a problem, you have a unique perspective on that issue. You see the field like, oh, we just need to do X, and you're on that cliff and asking yourself, do I jump off or do I not, right? Because jumping off into that cliff as an entrepreneur is truly how it feels. There's no bottom. You can't see. You don't know. You might hit water. You might hit the ground, right? And so for me, I've been sharing my experience of how did I decide to do this? And I went through some thought models myself, and I'll show my age here. At the time when I founded Care Sherpa, I was on the cusp of my 40th birthday and had gone through some major life changes at home that changed my financial situation for the negative. And it's
Mhm.
one of those moments where I'm like, okay, I can do this, but I'm going to give myself a certain amount of time to do it, and I have to hit certain success milestones. And if it's not working, then I gotta, cut bait, right? Um, but then what was interesting is early on when I set some of those milestones, they came and they went, and then I was like, oh wait, I was gonna, and I was so busy doing what I wanted to do, and so busy having fun and sometimes not fun, that those milestones became less relative to me. But now that I'm coming on, I've set a new range, which is like, okay, I'm going to give in myself X number of years to get to certain milestones and then decide, because now the cool part is I'm saying, do I want to continue to build this and where else do I want to go? Is there other partners I want to partner with? So the long short is for me, that's what worked was to say I had to have a plan A, B, C, or a plan D. And lastly, I'll say this because you get this too, which is I also said, you can get a job anytime. And tomorrow, if I fail, I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and I can go back into the market and say, "Hey, Humberto, I'm for hire. How can I help you?"
Hmm.
Like that. That's always there.
Yeah,
So,
even through the process of building a company like yours, obviously you're very successful, you worked out, but even if you didn't, you'd still have made a lot of really meaningful connections and people that
oh
you
my
can lean
gosh,
on. And like you said, you could always
100%.
go back and work someplace,
Always.
right?
Yeah. Well, as long as you don't burn those bridges, right? But no, I mean, and then that's exactly it. And I think that the biggest challenge, if I'm, being vulnerable here for a moment, it's that financial risk. How long can I go taking myself out of the market, or what does that look like? And I personally, for a period of time, I forego any salary. I just wanted to put it back into the business, right?
That's
And
probably
it,
the hardest part, I would say, right?
oh,
That's just
oh,
to be able, I mean, because I talk to a lot of my friends and even family about this. It's like what we call the golden handcuffs. It's really hard to get away from that paycheck
yep,
coming every week,
yep,
every 2 weeks or
yep,
so, and healthcare benefits. And I know you
all
have
that.
kids, so that makes it even
Yep,
harder.
yep,
Um, yeah,
yeah. But I was somebody, even in my career, I love that you brought up golden handcuffs. So I used to talk about this with other people. And I worked for large global consultancy firms and all that. But, if I would have stayed here, their company, like I would be a much richer woman today. But I decided early on that I'm not going to be handcuffed somewhere out of a financial, like I wasn't afraid that I didn't get myself in a lifestyle that made me afraid to walk away, right? And that's freedom. And even starting Care Sherpa when I went through, my home changes at life, and I purposely said, okay, what can I do to minimize? Like I'm driving an older car than maybe I would have a few years ago. Again, I haven't bought and sold houses in that time, so you make those trade offs, but you also, like I said, I knew that I was going to be a period of time not to be able to contribute to my retirement. Okay, so I put that into my calculation and say at what point, does this investment, outweigh that? So,
yeah. I mean, it's for me, it's like I don't know, pretty much every week I'm having a conversation with a friend of mine or somebody that's telling me, I guess because I don't know, they know that I'm, in the healthcare space and running this company. They're always asking me like, "Oh, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of that?" And I always say the same thing. The difference between the people that are out there doing it, like you, like pretty much any of these entrepreneurs that we know,
uh-huh,
from Jeff Bezos to even a small, somebody
uh-huh,
that like we had an ice cream shop that opened up down the street, and we went and met the owner. He's excited about it. The difference between you and them is that they just took the time to sit down and say, okay, what is going to be the impact on
uh-huh,
me? Can I take it? And
yep,
how long am I willing to withstand that? To then say, okay, it didn't work out. I can, like you said, go back and get a job
yep,
someplace, but
yeah,
try it, because the number of people that are out there doing what they don't like just for the paycheck is
you got it. You got
insane.
it.
And
Yep.
it's crazy to think that you spend a third of your life working and you can be unhappy doing it, you know?
Yep. It's funny, as a female entrepreneur, the other thing I think about too, and my team, I have an amazing team, and we're primarily female, and that's kind of the first time I've worked in a predominantly female group as well. And it's, not intentional, it just kind of has happened that way. But we were reflecting it. So the other thing I love about what I'm doing now is that everything that I believed in terms of a team and culture and how to treat people, I have the power to do that and make it happen. Everything I used to, spend time trying to convince my executives and my leaders, like, oh, we have to do this for the team. Now I just get to do it. And so I firmly believe the benefits that I'm seeing is because of, that choice, right? Um, and I'm like you, but I'm at the point now that even if like tomorrow I shutter Care Sherpa and say, well, that was a great run, here we are, I know that what I've learned, I'm going to rinse, repeat, and do another, next adventure because you can't not once you've like started that. So,
True, 100%. I love talking about that stuff. Um,
which I love that we also went to the vulnerable place because like what I hate about entrepreneurism is the hero story. We always want to say like, oh,
don't get
right,
me started. I
yeah,
hate when I like listen to. I was listening to an interview with the guy who started DeepMind, which is like the now engine behind Google Gemini, which is their
uh-huh,
AI, the like ChatGPT. And of course, without fail, he goes, "Well, I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur when I was 6 years old." I was like, "Really?
Get out. Come
you
on.
come on."
Come on. Yeah, the hero story, for those who like, hit it big, or those who did a lot of fundraising, or those, whatever, like it drives me insane, because I think that from a mental health perspective, it just sets people up to like be like marinating in imposter syndrome, or marinating in this like negative spiral. Um, a friend of mine started a company called Hang On Health, and that was where she was an entrepreneur that failed, and then what she learned from a mental health journey. So now she's helping other entrepreneurs. And that was the conversation I had. Like, I'm willing to put myself out there and be vulnerable and say, yeah, this sucks. There's times where it's like I go in a deep, dark cave and, have to like figure it out, because to me, that's the reality. And resiliency becomes a big part of it. And I'd rather have founders and entrepreneurs talking about that and saying it's okay not to be okay.
There's one other aspect of this, which is like whenever you hear someone talking about a CEO, a CFO, some kind of like high
Uh-huh.
level executive, there's always this like sense of pedestal that these people are like smarter than everybody, or that they're kind of, you know, more capable.
Hmm.
And I like going to the vulnerable places because the reality is you and I and everybody else, it doesn't matter how big the company is, have, personal things and challenges and have gone through the same kind of line of thinking that we're talking about here to get
Uh-huh.
to where we are.
Yep.
There's really no like magic wand that says, "Oh, this guy is, he's gonna be successful, or this, person's gonna be successful no matter what." It just doesn't happen. You learn
Yep.
through
Yep.
iteration and failing, right?
Yep, yep. And I think that grit and resiliency, I think there is some measure in there. One of my, so Nashville, again, big entrepreneur community in the healthcare space, and Jason Moore, who'd founded and exited with a company called Stratazan, was an early kind of mentor to me when I was thinking about, do I jump off the cliff, right? And the other thing he's told me when I've run into a couple different times, he's like, just don't quit. If you decide to leave, that's different. Don't quit because you're quitting on yourself. And there's moments where, and I even not too long ago, I had to hold up the mirror and say, is it time? Is it time to stop? Did I hit that wall? Did I hit that threshold that now it's, and when I do that and you kind of deep, review and think about it, for me, it was like, no, it's not time. We are so close to this, or we're so close. And so, I think that his words kind of play in my mind, which is, yeah, that level of, don't quit on yourself. So,
Yeah. Let's shift a little bit over to, um, well, I guess let me ask you this. What if you weren't doing this? Obviously, you've got an extensive career in healthcare and marketing. If money was no object, and, lifestyle, and just if you decided to do what you loved the most, what would you be doing? Is it this? Is it something else?
I used to do strengths coaching with Gallup, and this when I talk about that is like, those days where like time flies by and you're happy in your zone of genius and everything, all that, firing on all cylinders. So for me, and I thought about this, like, what's this, life retirement post. So a couple of things. I love solving problems. I love fixing problems. And that's kind of what Care Sherpa is about, right? Helping optimization and practice revenue problems, etc. So doing that, but then also what I've learned now in this journey, win, lose, or draw. So if money was no object, all I would be doing is volunteering my time to be a coach and a supporter and helping people fix problems, the things that are getting in their way, whether it be the business and etc. And I've thought about that a lot. Where now, even on the flip, what I've gone through as a female entrepreneur, I would love to be able to go and help other women see that this is a path, this is a journey, because no one told me it was. And so I had to kind of stumble into it. And so I often think, well, what if you got a young woman in junior high and you start to say, hey, this is an opportunity for you and it's possible. You don't have to be, an inheritance and come from money. Like I didn't. And look where, so those things, I guess I would say, like somewhere where I'm helping people kind of see the path forward and whatever that path is.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of I often, you said the retirement and like what are you going to do after this, or I don't know, when you grow up. And I often think about like, yeah, I mean, maybe I can use my know-how and experience to help other
Mhm.
younger entrepreneurs to kind of you know take jump off the cliff and actually, because I think a lot of it is um, like I said, people have ideas, but they don't really know how to map out the risk and the investment, and can they go to somebody for money and things like that. And I think for what you mentioned, that would be an amazing kind of after this thing that you can do.
Yeah. And yeah, I very much think like I've made some mistakes with some dollars and zeros behind it, right? And similar, if I could help someone else not make those mistakes, or even, I find that in this journey, one of the things that I've grown the most in is that I find that I seek counsel and I seek perspective. In the past, when I was consulting, I just knew what I would do it, had a gut instinct and would go with it. And now I have found that I'm more reflective of like, the partner that introduced us as an example is someone that, I've enjoyed getting to, bring issues to and just get his perspective. May not always agree with it, but like it gives me another view. And so, if I could be that person, because we all need to have that mentor that holds you and, pulls you up.
That's
Yeah.
very true. What are some book or podcast recommendations that you have for us today?
Oh,
Maybe I
man.
put you on the spot because I probably should
Yeah.
have asked, told you I was going to ask you this, but hopefully you
No.
have podcasts or books.
Well, I'll say like the last three things I've been thinking about. So, right now on my library loan that I'm waiting for it to become available is 10x is harder than, so getting that book to read like that next level, or 10x is easier than, I can't remember. I'll have to now say it wrong. But it's the idea of how that next level of growth in your company, is easier than the first series of growth, right? The other has been everything I am absorbing, finding everything I can from an AI perspective. So personally with the business and internally, just leveraging AI to make like duplicate myself in a way. So there's in a book that I just finished that was AI leadership around how do you incorporate AI to help you become a better, stronger leader. And then another one and focused on AI in marketing and sales. I say that because I hate it when I get a inbound sales cold that's clearly written by AI. So my mission is if I can understand it and make sure not to do those things, and but have it still be me and authentic. So that's been where my brain has been lately.
Yeah. And conversely, if you get, hit by some kind of uh, a pitch or approach where he's like, "Oh, this is pretty clever. I should know about this. I
Uh
need to
huh.
look into it." That's also good to know. We're taking a very aggressive approach toward AI because we think um, there's so much more efficiency. There's so much sort of grunt work that can be
Oh yeah.
automated by AI in a day to day,
Uh huh.
especially like contract reviews or
Oh yeah.
whatever, analyzing big data sets and things
Oh
like
my
that.
gosh.
That
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's when we were talking earlier about people worrying about human versus AI. I think the people that are doing what you're doing, that are kind of staying kind of up to date with the times, are going to continue to prosper, and the people that are going to be resistant to it are the ones that are going to have challenges,
Yep.
right?
And I, even internally, so my CTO is AI forward, and even it's completely changed how we've done some of our development in house, et cetera. But that it's like a cascading, right? So like I'm AI curious, so I dig in and I learn more. He and I have, we call them nerd out sessions and explore things. But then I take that as my duty to my layer below. So my leaders, I'm holding them accountable to start using AI in different ways, right? And so I've set up different GPTs for them. I've set up different automations for them using AI, but then literally requiring them to, if you want to grow in your role, this is where you grow, right? And my team all the way cascading down. You're right, it makes people uncomfortable. There's this curve that kind of talks about your AI adoption that I read about in the AI leadership book. And that's exactly it. You have this like light bulb moment where you're like, oh my God, this is what it's capable of. And then you drop down because it's like, oh, this is a lot to learn. But you just got to push through and what you get on the other side. So that's what I've been really focused on with my leaders and my teams, even down to Sherpas. Like, this is how it's going to adopt or die, right? So adopt it, learn it, or you're going to die because like this is where we're headed.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, Jessica, you're an amazing guest. I appreciate you being here today. I love chatting with you every time I get a chance because you're very eloquent, you're very knowledgeable of your space,
Thanks.
and you have this kind of just really broad knowledge and view of the healthcare space. And I'm glad that we have somebody like you actually applying real world solutions to what we are dealing with in the behavioral health space. Um, where can people reach you if they're wanted to
Yeah.
hire you or just chat about what they're going through?
I'm so glad you asked. So caresherpa.com is the easiest way to find a little bit more about us. I'm very active on LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I think I was I'm the first Jessica Walker that claimed a LinkedIn page. So
Nice.
been on there since I don't know whenever it first came out. So LinkedIn, you can easily find me there. And I'm we'll also add you to, I have a newsletter that I push out that's just a very simple, like 2 paragraph, hey, you should be thinking about this when it comes to marketing optimization, or hey, this is something else we're seeing in the consumer behavior. Like we just released a really interesting example of how what's happening with tourism and how that's affecting healthcare, right? And adoption. So all that to say, those minds and musings, reach out to me. I'll be glad you add you to my list. No pressure. I'm not that kind of salesperson, but even if you want to nerd out anything AI or patient experience, happy to do that.
Awesome. And we're going to be linking all of those resources below. Thank you again, Jessica, for being here today. I appreciate you. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.